mindful and respectful of everyone's opinions, and as this is a public meeting. Okay, that's number one. Number two is I'd like to ask, because there are so many participants in the group, that we use the raise your hand feature if you have questions or anything, so that we can keep track of the questions and the comments as well. And the other thing I'd like to ask is if you have something that you'd like to say, also, if you can't raise your hand, then go ahead and type it in the meeting chat box to the right, so that we can keep track of that as well. And again, be mindful that this is all recorded and it will all be shared, and it is a public meeting. So just be mindful of your comments that you share. Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm Tedra Porteous. This is the Health and Safety Operational Protocol. So there is another group going on, and I think that's Health and Safety Mindfulness. And then there's another group going on as well. John, do you know the name of the other group? That's the instructional group, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. That's the instructional group. There are
okay.
3 groups today. One's at 1. Okay. We're doing 2 at 9:15 today.
Okay.
The 2 you just mentioned.
So I'm just making sure that we are all on the same page and we're all in the correct group. This is, again, the Health and Safety Operational Group. And, correct. You know, and for me, let me say this, last week I messed up. I had another subgroup going on in the larger group, and so we weren't on the same page. So I just want to make sure that everyone here knows that they are in the correct meeting, number one. So as I've said earlier, we have a number of tasks to do. The overall point of this group is really to talk about the operations behind getting students and staff back in the buildings and what that looks like. So last week, based on your own meeting and then the meeting that I had, we talked about 2 things. So we talked about 2 things. One is the signage. So we agreed and talked about, discussed in detail how large the signage should be, the fact that we should have 2 separate signages or types of signs rather, one for elementary and one for secondary. Because, and with the secondary, it should be mainly pictures, kind of demonstrating hand washing, talking about it in using small letters or small words. And then secondary, we can provide greater detail. The other thing that we talked about was transportation. So I see Mr. Davis is on the line. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for joining us. And so we really need to kind of flesh that out as a group and decide what we are going to recommend to the overall larger group, because transportation is really going to be an issue for us. We do know that we serve, our county is pretty much the size of Rhode Island, right? We serve, I think, 500,000 miles. Is that right? A year? Rob? I can't hear you, Rob.
We travel around 10 million miles in a year.
Oh, 10 million miles in a year. Okay, so transportation is really, really large for all our district. So we just need to think about the impact of that. I've received a few emails from the task force members thus far, thinking about how we do transportation. One of the things that came up, I think Shane sent it to me, as well as Jenny Siren sent something. So thank you all for that. One of the things that came up in transportation last week is, do we do the temperature checks at the bus stops? And then if so, how would that work? And so based on the information that I've received, and this is where we all need to have a conversation about this, I don't believe that it will be beneficial for our community if we do temperature checks at the bus stops. One, I am uncomfortable with, I guess, having an aide do that. And I don't know that we would have enough staff for that, first and foremost. And 2, it's really going to cause a delay in terms of trying to check, let's say, a first grader's temperature at the bus stop. And let's say their temperature is over the 100.4. What do we do? Because we can't send them back home at that point. So Rob, do you want to weigh in? Do you have any thoughts about it?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Tedra. I meet with a peer group, the Florida Association of Pupil Transportation, and it's about 67 districts in there are 67 districts, and about 52 of those district leaders are participating in those meetings. And there are a few that are trying it during the summer school, but they're seeing delays. They're also seeing that the leave device on the bus, it overheats and will not function. So it's my recommendation that we do not do temperature checks at a bus stop. If they want to check when they come off the school bus, then that's something that we could look at. But at a bus stop, I'm concerned it will cause some issues.
Dr. Jackson, are you, Dr. Jackson or Dr. Hines, I think both of you are on. Is it your recommendation that we continue to do the temperature checks either at the bus stop, or what would you prefer if we do them at the bus stop or at the school site right when they come off the bus?
Dr. Hine, I'll defer to you.
Okay, sure. Sure, Tadra, I agree with you. I've been doing some research since the last meeting that we had, and just looking at what people across the globe are doing with school reopenings and temperature checks. And I guess the main thing is that the delays, and also what would the bus driver do if the child has a temperature, and just the risk of having to leave that child at the bus stop or bring a sick child onto the bus. So I think some of the recommendations that I saw were that parents can do a symptom check before the kids leave home. So they can check for fever, check to see if the child has a sore throat, any vomiting, diarrhea. And I guess that should be left up to the responsibility of the parent not to send the child to school. There were some schools that were recommending some sort of digital device. I don't know if you can use the Class Dojo. I don't know what you guys can use. And have the parents just fill out a symptom check in the morning before the child goes to school. I don't know if that's a possibility. But I just think doing the bus driver having that responsibility might be too great, especially if you have a child who's dropped off by the parent and the parent leaves and goes to work. So I think if there's some way that it can be done before school, I don't know how you guys are going to get that done without delaying the start of school. I don't know, but I think the best thing would be to educate the parents prior to the start of school, have them do a symptom check every morning, check the temperature of the child, and leave it up to the responsibility of the parent to not send a child who has a fever and has symptoms to school. I think we have to allow parents to be able to show that they're responsible enough to get that done.
Good point. Okay, so do we have any other thoughts about that? So right now what's on the table and what the recommendation is that we allow students to get on the bus. Would you recommend that we provide masks to all the students that get on the bus?
So I also looked at that as well too. So yeah, so face coverings are recommended when social distancing cannot be practiced. I think it's going to be pretty difficult depending on the number of kids on the bus to really distance them a full 3 to 6 feet. So I think face coverings should be recommended. They should be worn by the students, and they also should be worn by the drivers as well too, if possible, if there's no contraindication to it, like some physical textural issue or some issue with asthma and being allergic to the face covering. I think they should be able to wear them.
Kendra, can I say something?
Certainly. Hi, Larry. How are you?
Just fine. Sorry I'm late getting in, but I hit the wrong link. I got a problem with not checking before they're on the bus. We've got a lot of older bus drivers that are telling me they're really concerned about having kids get on their bus that hasn't been checked. I don't want this to be something that makes our bus drivers decide not to be driving our buses. We need to figure out, and I don't know how we can have parents check people, to tell you the truth, because everybody knows we try to get parents involved in everything with our kids, but it doesn't always happen. So I don't know how we're going to be able to check these kids at home, because most parents won't do it. And I don't think a responsibility putting it on a bus driver is not going to work either, because I don't think they're going to take that responsibility too lightly. But I do understand they need to be checked. And our bus drivers are really, I mean, like I said, we got a lot of older bus drivers, and a lot of them with other medical problems that they're really at high risk if they get the disease. So I don't know if letting the kids on the bus, and maybe one of the doctors here can explain what we can do if masks will help with that or something, because I know our bus drivers are really concerned. The ones that call me are concerned. In fact, some of them have actually found other jobs instead of going and driving the bus because they don't want to put themselves at that risk.
Okay,
and that's all. I just wanted to make sure I had that point.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Dr. Jackson, I think you wanted to comment.
Yes, please. Thank you. And, you know, obviously, we're all trying to balance the risks and benefits of how we get kids to school. From the standpoint of public health, if an exposure occurs on a bus, so the child gets on the bus, goes to school, arrives at school, and they're determined to have a fever and they're sick, it's likely, depending on how long they're on that bus, that that entire school bus has been exposed, from the driver to the rest of the students. So I fully understand the issues of screening before they get on, but I think the ramifications, all we'll need is a couple of buses, that the entire bus needs to be excluded, and we may be rethinking this. And this is a policy decision on you guys' part. But buses, in my opinion, are one of the biggest risks in getting kids to school.
Okay, Rob, do you want to address it? Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's probably when we're talking about 50 plus students on a school bus, there's no way that we can social distance. There's no way that, I mean, taking the temperature, we're not going to leave the child at the bus stop. We know that for a fact. It's our policy. If no one's there, we're going to take that child in. So if we scan a student and they have a temperature of 101 degrees and we isolate them to one seat, then we've exposed the bus anyway, because we cannot leave that child at the bus stop. And you would be surprised on how many parents do not accompany their child at the bus stop. If there was a way that we could enforce that, I would be. I mean, we've ordered the temperature gauges to do something like this. But the fact is, in reality, we know for a fact that there are going to be second graders at a bus stop with no supervision whatsoever. So if we take that temperature and they do have a temperature, we'll put them on the bus anyway, and we expose the entire bus already.
So let's really think about that. I guess okay, so we know that we have to provide some sort of transportation, right? And so we know that our board and our community expects us to provide the transportation. But what is the best way we can do that safely? Rob, can we have another, and this may be odd, but can we have maybe another bus or some other vehicle follow buses, so that if kids if we do the testing at the bus stops, which I think it's going to cause some chaos, but if we do some testing at the bus stop, instead of allowing them on the bus with those students, is there a way that we can pick them up in a separate vehicle maybe, or something like that?
Well, this is our situation right now as of today. We have 60 driver positions that we have to fill between now and August 10th. We've got about 18 people in training now, which has been delayed by 2 days for some other reasons. But so if we would not have the personnel for someone to follow a bus if we had a sick child, that they could get into a van or something of that nature. It's going to be difficult to get the students in with the numbers of positions that we're going to have open, I believe. And I understand the point Larry made. I've heard from some drivers. I've heard from others that say, hey, listen, I'm going to put a mask on. I'm going to disinfect. I'm going to do everything possible to get their babies, what they call their babies, into school, and put themselves at, whatever risk they have to make sure that they're doing their part. So, we have both sides of the spectrum, and it's going to be the biggest obstacle one of the biggest obstacles that we face. I know.
What we face. Okay. Steve Cochran had a question. Thank you, Rob. And I see Dr. Jackson and both Dr. Hines.
Yeah.
For 1 second, Dr. Hines, let me have Steve.
That's fine.
It's more of a less of a question and more of a suggestion. It's when you talk about having 50 kids on the bus, I mean, we pick up a lot of kids. We need to start talking about how we're going to lessen the load that we pick up, because it's going to be impossible for us to get all the kids to school with a distance of being in one seat or maybe two to a seat. So, things that we could start doing right now is there a possibility that we could extend out our walking zones where I think is it a mile away now, Rob?
It's 2 miles, and 50, or actually 49 students, or 48 with a para is less. We're going to have difficulties with that number. We normally will have a bus, elementary school bus, with 70 plus passengers in the bus driver. So with that number, we're going to need 139 more buses or 137 more buses just to do what we've done before the outbreak of the coronavirus. Do I think the numbers will be that high when we start school? I don't think so.
How much could we lessen our pickups if we extended out another mile and went to
Well, statute, we can't. Statute is 2 miles. If you live more than 2 miles or more away from the school that you're assigned, you receive transportation. So we can't go and arbitrarily say, okay, let's make that 3 miles now. We can look at, we have a large population that are under 2 miles. It's about 3,500 students that we need to address. There's a reason why some of those students are on the bus, and that's because the walking conditions don't meet hazardous walking by state criteria, but in our minds have been a risk. But in this day and time, I don't know if we can continue that service, although it will be another obstacle that we have to face with the public.
Well, that might be one way to lighten it some. And additionally, what if we started to encourage parents about carpooling? Because the safest way to get their kids to school is in groups of 1 or maybe 2, as long as it's a small group. If we got the word out that, that for safety reasons, we would really encourage parents to bring their own kids to school. We know it's not possible for every kid, but we do know that a lot of parents could bring their kids to school, even if they could just bring them and, on a one-way, and then we'll take them home. It'd be easier to make a couple trips after school than to get the kids to school on time for a full day of school. But anyway, those were just a couple things that I wanted to throw out there. I did want to say this, that if we did decide to measure temperatures when the kid gets on the bus, I do realize that we would have a problem with some kind of trail vehicle. I think that there are people like myself that if we were on call for a zone to go pick up a kid, I could take the van and take another person, put on our personal protective equipment, and go pick up a kid. I mean, I understand. I think it's important for us to not put a kid on the bus who's got a temperature. And I don't think it's going to happen that often, but it's going to happen. So that if we had people on standby to pick up, not necessarily drivers, not necessarily bus drivers, but approved drivers throughout the district, we might be able to make something like that happen if we divide it up by zones. That's all I have.
Okay, that's a good idea. Thank you, Steve. Dr. Hines and Dr. Jackson, I think you all wanted to comment.
Sure. Tadra, I was just going to echo what Mr. Cochran was saying. I agree that we should start to encourage parents to seek alternative modes of transportation for kids to school. That's actually one of the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I do see it from both sides. I mean, being a pediatrician, I really feel that they should be temperature checked before they go on the bus, but it's difficult. And I mean, if the parents drop off and the kids have a fever, they really can't leave them at the bus stop, and it really is going to hold up traffic as well. I was also wondering about, plans to keep the windows open on the buses, to keep that air kind of circulating out and not circulating in the bus. That would also help. And also like probably put in a plexiglass where the bus driver is sitting as well too. That might also help to decrease the risk of transmission of droplets to the driver and from the driver to the students as well too. Also looking at decreasing the numbers of students on the bus as well. I think that a lot of parents probably will, if they have other options, drive their kids to school, or they will carpool because they're also afraid as well. So I think those are other options that we can probably look at.
Good, thank you. Dr. Jackson?
I've got nothing else to add. Dr. Hine said exactly what I was going to recommend, so
okay,
nothing
good,
to add.
Just to follow up, we have some comments in the chat. So Jenny Siren said, I think we need to have parents commit to reporting their students riding the bus or driving them. I understand that if students qualify for transportation, we have to transport them, but this would give us an idea. Times are different. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We're going to have to communicate to families and have them work with us to come up with a solution to keep buses safer. Agreed, Jenny. I think that's really, really a great idea. I think that based on one of the last surveys that went out, Mrs. Townley is going to include or did include something about bus transportation. If she did not, I know that's coming up probably in one of another sort of survey for parents. And Linda King also said, I think we need a bus registration process for this year based on changes due to COVID-19. And I agree with that as well. Again, I think we're going to put some of that in place. Any other comments? Or Chris, your hand is up.
Yes, ma'am. According to the research I'm seeing, if the person who is carrying COVID is not wearing a face mask, it's possible up to a 70% transmission rate. If they are wearing a face mask and the person that they could possibly be infected is wearing a face mask, that drops all the way down to 8%. So therefore, it is imperative that we as a committee, I feel, before we move any further on anything else, come up with the statement that there is no option but to wear a face mask, both on the bus and at school. It's something that it has been wearing on me completely. It is fully possible for us to tell our students you have to wear a uniform to come to school. We can tell our students that we have to have an ID. So the concept that's going through other counties of we can't tell a child not to wear a mask, I feel is ludicrous. If a parent wants to make the choice that their child does not wear a face mask, let them do virtual learning, but as a policy for Polk County, face masks will be required, and I think that will help with our bus situation here tremendously.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate that. I think, I don't know that you all know this, but here at the district office, we just received an email from Mrs. Bird that said face masks must be worn when you're outside of your office. So if I go into my secretary's office or if I go out into the rest of the building, I must now have on a face mask. And I'm saying that to say I think everyone realizes and recognizes the value in having a face mask on, particularly when you're interacting with other adults and or students. So yes, I think that would be a recommendation. Let me ask the committee, does everyone agree that as a committee, we can recommend to the overall larger task force that we are saying face masks should be not required, but recommended strongly? You want required? Required? Yeah. Okay, strongly required or required when we are in school. However, I'm seeing a comment from Mrs. April Sumner, and Mrs. Sumner, she is a principal at one of our special needs schools. And her comment is there will be a problem with ESC students, which are special needs students like ours at Gene Odell Learning Center. Many will refuse to wear as a sensory issue. That's understandable, Mrs. Sumner. I think, though, we will have obviously some exceptions for various students, medical exceptions or exemptions rather for students and staff that cannot wear the mask. particularly at a school like yours, like that's a special learning center. We will definitely think about that and provide alternatives for them. However, if we're thinking about just the general population, and I think that's what Chris was referring to, if we think about the general population of students that are in a traditional K-8 or staff that are in a tradition, I'm sorry, not K-8, K-12, sorry. Or if we're thinking about a K-12 population of staff, that is something that we from this health and safety operational group are going to recommend. So just put agreed in the comments just to make sure I capture that, and then we'll go from there. And then Jenny Siren also in the comments says, how is Polk going to provide this for employees and students? So I know that Mr. Davis, and maybe you want to comment on this, we have ordered quite a bit of masks for staff in anticipation of this. And masks are now more freely available. So I think we will be able to provide masks for students and for staff. The other caveat is just like we're working with parents to say, hey, you need to make sure your child's temperature is lower. The other thing we can do is say, please make sure that your child comes to school with a mask on, or provide a mask for them. I think we will probably have to have some sort of regulatory kind of function, meaning if the mask is dirty, if it's soiled, if it is, I don't know, dirty or soiled are the only things that come to mind for me. But then we'll likely, oh, sorry, my computer dropped, hold on. Then we'll likely have to provide an additional face mask or some sort of face covering for them. Yeah, then we'll have to provide an additional face mask or face covering. But I think that we should be okay with mandating or requiring them to wear face masks. So do we have any other, I think Steve and Mr. Davis both have questions. I'm not sure who was first. So let's go with Steve. Steve?
I was just going to say that my hand is accidentally up, so go to Rob.
Okay, Rob?
Okay, face mask, we've got over 350,000 in our warehouse. We will receive approximately that many again. The EOC provided a large number of them. We've ordered a large number of them. So I think the last count I received, we had over 350 in our warehouse, and we probably have, before school started, close to 700,000 masks. We had planned to provide bus drivers with cases of masks in case the student came to the bus without one. They would issue them one, and then if it continued to be a ongoing basis, we would deal with that. As far as shields for the bus drivers, it's something that we would love to put on our school buses. Right now, we're getting pushback from the DOE and the Florida Bus Specs Committee. I'm not sure why. It would protect our drivers. It's not something that's permanently installed and can be easily removed, and that bus driver can get out of it very quickly and easily. But at this point, we've hit a roadblock with DOE and our Florida School Bus Spec Committee. Face shields, I saw Ms. Fortney say face shields. That's something that we can look at, but I'm not sure how Dr. Jackson and Dr. Hines, how that would work, if it worked better. I know we talked about goggles in our last meeting. We're ordering goggles for all of our drivers, and then the face shields, I'm clearly open to.
So are you talking about the shields that kind of go up here and then they come straight down, those? Or I saw bigger shields. I don't know if we're talking about like a shoulder to head shield. Or what are we talking about, Rob?
I think it's the shield that you see from here to face down, covering the face entirely. What we were talking about was a permanent shield, like you'll see in at cashier locations, they'll have a shield in front of them. We were looking at something like that. That was is basically similar to a boat canvas, clear boat canvas that would protect the driver. But Ms. Fortney, I believe, is talking about the mask on the face shield itself.
Right. If I may interject, especially for the elementary school kids, and our ESC population possibly, I think that be more comfortable, and if we're going to have to cram 50 kids on a bus, we might as well start right there. And it would be just like having your book bag with you, to me. But that's just what I'm.
So.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Fortney. So I'm just reading the chat as well. Audrey Kelly said, I'm all in for masks, but we have trouble getting them to stay off their phones. I do think that we will need to address this as a discipline issue as well for students who won't wear one. So that is something I think that can be probably, and I hate to say it, but regulated at the school site with the administrators. Yeah. And unfortunately, I hate to put more on teachers, but teachers and classroom management. So everybody, just like you say, hey, stay off your phone, or go get your pencil, or let's pull out and do some work for the day. I think that will have to be addressed there. I'm not necessarily for, this is Tedra, I'm not necessarily for writing a student referral, and creating that record for a student that is not wearing a mask. That's just Tedra. And I think we have to think about that from the instructional school side, because now we're really creating this discipline trail that may follow the student. And I think this is, again, just going back to instructional. I think we may also see, if we do that, an uptick in the amount of referrals written over the year. So yes, I do agree that there should be some discipline, quote unquote, and I'm just not sure what that looks like. And I think we can kind of work that out, but I get your point and I agree. Does anybody else have any comment on Audrey Kelly's comment?
I do. I just wanted to say that we don't need to make it an official discipline issue. If you don't wear your mask, you don't go to class. We'll have other options for that.
I love that saying, and I think I actually may put it on a sign, Steve. Oh, good job. Okay.
Coin that, trademark.
Steve Cocker.
There was one other thing I wanted to ask about the bus drivers and their mask. Are we buying them any special masks to wear? I was wondering if we wanted to invest, since they're going to be at the most risk, because they're going to be in a confined area with students for the longest amount of time. There's nothing, we can't get around that. Perhaps we could invest in a very high quality mask for them, one that already comes with a goggle set and a respirator. These are expensive masks, but they might be a good investment for them.
You're muted, Tedra. There you go.
Dr. Jackson, do you believe that that's necessary, or how would you advise on that?
I honestly would need to do a little bit of research on that, and I think we need to see what the guidelines tell us. And I absolutely agree with you. We need to do what we can to protect our bus drivers. But whether that is a plexiglass shield, which I heard on the news last night, American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending. But I mean, there's going to be a lot of recommendations, and you all are going to have to decide. What I don't know is if a face shield adds any extra protection to a bus driver than a good mask. And is a cloth mask as good as a surgical mask? I think if you get to N95s and respirators, then you run into the issue. Those need to be fit tested, or they're really no better than a surgical mask. So I would propose that there be some research on what are others espousing as being the best safety. That doesn't have to be me to do that, but I think we need to do due diligence in making sure that our drivers are as protected as reasonable.
Dr. Jackson, in our last meeting, you had recommended that N95 mask be used with our at most at need and special risk students. So we have taken those steps to acquire those.
Thank you.
for our bus attendants and drivers that are dealing with those students.
I put them in the category of being a healthcare provider. And I think we need to follow the healthcare provider guidelines for personal protection for individuals that work with their ESE students.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't leave out our bus attendants, because they're actually back in the back with the students. They're not sitting in the driver's seat where they're kind of, a driver is a little bit away from the students. They're still at risk, but a attendant is back there in the back of the bus with the students themselves. So we need to make sure we have all kinds, gloves or whatever it is for them, because they sometimes have to have hands on some of these students that are needy students. I just want to make sure we have the protection for them too.
So good point, Larry. And in my mind, and maybe this is just me, but in my mind, bus attendants and bus drivers are synonymous for the purpose of this conversation. Okay, so I when I'm saying bus attendants or bus drivers with the shield, I'm also thinking bus attendants would have the same thing. I would not necessarily, I am not an advocate at all of giving one something and then the other something else. So
I just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to make sure, like, you know, because the attendants really have more hands-on than the bus drivers do with the students themselves. Right. I mean, they're touching and stuff them sometimes. So I just want to make sure that they're protected. I don't want to see an attendant touch a student that has a runny nose or something, and somehow it's on their hands, and then next thing you know, they've got the COVID. Right. So I just want to make sure we take them steps too.
Okay, very good point. I have a number of hands up. So
you're muted, Tedra.
Sorry, I have a number of hands up. And so after Mr. Hill, and then I have Chris, and then I saw that Dr. Hines wanted to respond as well. So if we could respond in that order, and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So I greatly appreciate the specificity of our discussion today in regards to how whatever we determine, masks, temperature checks, once that process hits a school site, I think it's going to be very important, because we know that enforcing those requirements, that's where the rubber meets the road. And so, Tedra, I appreciate the fact that when it comes to discipline, let's use some processes where we're teaching, we're setting expectations, and we're working with the kids. I like Steve's, if you don't have a mask, that was good, Steve. We probably use that. Tedra's going to coin that for you. And so I think we've got some school-based personnel here. You know, we got our teachers and we have principals. I think I saw Art's hand up as well. So I think they can be the ones to kind of talk through and flesh out what that will look like in terms of enforcing the requirements that we set, or the expectations that we set.
Hey, John, this is Art, and I certainly appreciate it. The question that I have, and I'm a firm believer in, if you have a policy, if you have a rule, you need to enforce it. If you're not going to enforce it, you can't have it. And that's going to be very difficult in a school to enforce mask all day. You know, we have IDs. And I'm going to be honest with you, we have a lot of kids that do not wear them every day. We give out hundreds of IDs weekly. And so, you know, it is going to become a situation. It's going to become a problem. But we have to be able to enforce a policy. If students do not want to wear their mask, then we have to come up with an alternative. You know, and I know that Steve mentioned the, you know, no mask, you don't go to class. I mean, that's great, but where do you put them? Just like the same situation with the buses, where, you know, they don't get on the bus. Where are these kids going to be? And if you do bring them on the bus, I mean, there's all kinds of situations and issues that are going to come about throughout the course of you know, the first few weeks of school, to really kind of determine what we are actually going to enforce and what we're not going to enforce. I'm all for it, but then it also plays on a different part. Being in a high school, you have athletics. We're requiring students to wear masks and teachers and staff to wear masks. You have football games. You have all those. I mean, you got kids tackling each other. Different sporting events. How do you enforce those too? And those are things that we really need to kind of hone in as well. There's so much to this, and I just, and I agree with a lot of people that are speaking. There's some things that need to be addressed, and the sooner the better. But I know this task is so tremendous, and it just weighs so much on all of our shoulders. But we, regardless of what we do, if we make a decision on some, you're going to have others that disagree, and if you go the opposite way, you're going to have the other side disagree. So it's going to be a decision that we just got to be very hard on and say this is what we need to do because of the guidelines set by CDC, the state of Florida, the governor, whoever, and this is why we have to do this. But it's got to be a hard stance, unfortunately, and it's not always the decisions that we make are not always going to be welcomed in the public, unfortunately. And so, but again, I do think we're going to have issues in the schools. I am all for the students and the staff wearing masks or shields, however we want to do this. But someone made a comment as well. High school kids are on their phones a lot, and so wearing masks, we're going to have some issues. How are we going to handle that? I'll be more than happy to do whatever, but we've got to come up with a hard stance on this is the policy, this is how we're going to enforce it. And it's got to be across the board, across the district, because there's been situations where we have, as a school, have made decisions and we've had phone calls to say, hey, can we work through this because of whatever? And we just need to all be on the same page. It's going to be a difficult task, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Okay, so I don't know if it has been shared with most of the people in this room or not, but PEA has unanimously decided that right now, with the number of cases skyrocketing, we can't take the responsibility of having a face-to-face option. And while we all want to be back with our kids, we can't in good conscience subject anyone to the virus by physically opening the schools. The price is simply too high. But if this group is going to insist on the possibility of opening schools, coming to school is now going to become a privilege. So therefore, if you're going to be coming to school and you're not going to be wearing your face mask, you're not wearing a mask, you don't come to class, as Steve said. It's simple as that. You have the virtual option. If you choose to not want to wear your mask at school, this is an option for you to have as a privilege to be at this school. So you don't want to wear it? Awesome. Here's your computer. Go to it.
Okay, thank you, Chris. A part of this is we're just thank you, Art. I appreciate both of your perspectives. A part of this is just figuring it out. And so, as Art has mentioned, nothing is going to be perfect. There are going to be some hiccups. We are going to expect that. There are going to be some glitches. We can expect that. And also, there's going to be some negative pushback. We get that, right? And so, for us, it's just trying to figure out what we believe and is the best thing to do from everyone's perspective. That's why we have teachers, administrators, district personnel, medical personnel on the call to make sure that we're thinking about all the options as possible, as many as possible, and then we'll roll it out accordingly. So just so I'm clear, the one thing that we have decided today is and I think it's almost unanimously, if everyone put agreed, in the chat. If you have not, please make sure you do. Or if you disagree, say disagree. And then just tell us why. But the one thing that we have decided is we are going with some sort of mask, either a face covering or a mask. If students don't have them, they will, or shields will be a better option. Okay, thank you, Jenny. But essentially what we're trying to say is we expect that the students and staff, all staff, will come to school or be in a district building with some sort of face covering on, right? That covers their nose and their mouth so that if you sneeze, if you cough, if you talk or laugh loudly, all of those droplets are then covered and hopefully captured in the mask. And then based on what Rob Davis has told us, we have about 500,000. I don't know if I'm correct, quoting that correctly, Rob, but I think we have about 500,000 masks available. And then based on what Art shared, It is correct. Thank you. Okay. And then based on what Art shared, we need to, from a school-based perspective, and I need you all to think about this. So maybe this is homework for you. How are we going to really enforce that in a school, particularly those people that are school-based, right? So what does that look like? How are we going to deal with that? And in my mind, so when a student is at a bus stop, if they don't have a mask, then maybe the bus attendant will hand them a mask, and then they get on the bus. Everyone goes to school. We ride to school. We're okay. Once we get off the bus at school, are we doing temperature checks at that time? Is that a yes? So we're zapping everybody. I shouldn't say zapping. I'm sorry. We are taking temperatures of all the students at that time once they are exiting the bus. And so if they are exiting the bus, and if they have a temperature that is higher than 100.4, then they go to a designated area, and then maybe we retest them in about 10 minutes. Is that correct? And so we're doing that with all levels. So right now, and maybe Mr. Wiggins would like to weigh in on this, and it is 10 o'clock. So if you have to go, I do understand that. I do want to be respectful of your time. So it is 10 o'clock, everyone. I know that this may go over, so I apologize in advance, but if you want to stay on the call, and if you don't want to, it's okay. And thank you for joining us. Mr. Wiggins, right now, and Art, right now, we have one point of entry, right, for all schools. Is that correct? How does that work if now we're having, let's say, a parent drop off, a student walk section, a student, let's say a student driving section for high schools, and then the bus section as well. So how are we going to do that in terms of, are we still doing the one point of entry, I guess, at the school, or is that still required? Can someone weigh in on that for me? I think I see Larry Milhorn has his hand up, and who else? Someone else has their hand up. Larry, but go ahead so far.
Yeah. I was just going to say that if we test a child coming off the bus, which I'm okay if everybody's agreeing to do that. I just want to make sure that if one student comes off that bus and it does have a higher temperature, we're going to hold all the students back to make sure they're checked, because if they check the second time and they have it, we can't put all the students who were on that bus, let them loose into the school, is what I'm just trying to get at. So we need to figure out something to either quarantine them until the child checked the second time, or what, just to make sure we don't send all them kids into a classroom that were on that bus with them.
So really good point, Larry. Instead of maybe having them exit the bus, do we want maybe someone to go on the bus and take the temperatures of the students while on the bus?
Either way, I'm just to the point to where we need to make sure if one student is checked coming off that bus, that they're all either quarantined and checked or what before they're allowed into the school with other students.
Okay. So does anyone have any suggestion based on what Larry said? I guess my suggestion would be someone would get on the bus instead of students exiting the bus. My suggestion is once the bus pulls up at school, someone from the school would get on the bus, or maybe even the bus attendant is still there. She would take the temperatures of all the students. If all the students are free and clear and under 100.4, then they can all exit the bus. If not, if one student tests positive, then we drive around maybe, wait a little, and then wait 10 minutes and then retest them. And if they are still above 100.4, then that bus would be quarantined, essentially. The whole bus, including the bus driver and the bus attendant, everyone would be on the bus, and they would just be quarantined until we figure out, I guess, an isolation area for them. Any thoughts or comments on that? I see several hands up, so let's go with, I think Mike Wiggins. I have Mike Wiggins first. So Mr. Wiggins?
Yes, you were talking about single point of entry, and basically that just deals with once school has started for visitors. So you're going to have a bus loop, you'll have walkers, and then you'll have a car rider line, which are separate points at the school. So we may have to think about how we're going to control each one of those, types of students as they arrive. But when we talk about single point, that doesn't mean every student comes to a single point in the morning for school. That just deals with once school has started.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Chris, go ahead.
Sorry, got to unmute everything. So my concern is going to become at that point, how are we going to physically man this proposal that we're talking about? We have to have a place for the children to go to for holding areas before they go to class, or they are going directly to their class. If we are sending them directly to their class, who is going to be the person that is getting on every single bus? Who is going to be the person standing at every single entrance taking these temperatures? Where does the manpower come from in order to physically accomplish everything that we are saying that we want to do?
Can I jump in on
Of
that?
course.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking through all the scenarios that principals, school-based leaders, and teachers, in terms of covering all the traffic patterns, the points of entry, and just the traffic that goes around the school in a given day. So obviously, procedures and well-designed procedures for that would be essential. And then, to Chris's point, making sure you had enough staff to cover that, because we've had, let's just talk about the practicalities of life in a school. You think we got the bus loop covered, and then you find out 10 minutes after the bus arrives that somebody wasn't there, but they got called over to something else and they're handling a situation. And so communication, having a well-designed plan is going to be critical in any of that. And, you know, we have to go ahead and build out options for this, even though, as Chris said, there's obviously concerns and there's going to be folks that want to go the virtual route. But we do have to build out a plan to try to account for these things. And they're very complex, as Chris pointed out. That's another piece that principals, all of us have to think through. How are we going to be able to provide that kind of support at the school site?
You're facing the dilemma that PEA put out a survey, and 25% of our staff currently are high risk. So you're going to be losing 25% of your staff going to virtual.
Well, the other thing is, remember that these are all recommendations, everyone, right?
Correct.
So our point is to make a recommendation to the overall task force and then ultimately to the superintendent and the board as to what we're doing and what we believe is best for all of our students and all of our staff. And so it's not necessarily written in stone. Some of this could change. And so we are just at this point making what we believe are the best recommendations.
Right.
And so
putting together contingencies. Yes. Thank you, Ted.
Correct. And
thank
so
you,
thank
Chris.
you, Mr. Hill. Thank you, Chris. What about Audrey? I see Audrey Kelly has her hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. We have made plans. We do have temperature guns or no temp thermometers that can, I'm sorry about that, that can be utilized, that we have ordered them based on the number of people in each school. And with penchant towards bus riders, car riders, walkers, so that there be various entry points. Now, that said, if you're at a big high school, you may have to limit some of those entry points because sometimes they're coming from all over. But it would be based on the number of students, and that would require you to have more people, the larger number of students that you have. I do have a question maybe for Dr. Hines about having to quarantine all the people on a bus simply because one person has a high temp. I had not thought about that. My original thought was that you could check people on the bus, the people who have a higher temp, if they do, they would go right then to the nurse station, and the nurse would do an evaluation, quick high temp, and then call their parents as needed, or let them go because they don't actually have a temperature. It might be something with a gun. And I was just kind of wanting to know, Dr. Hines, what you thought about that.
Good question. I was thinking about it as Tedra was, discussing the options if a child was febrile. And I think that it would be very difficult to just quarantine in the entire bus, especially if we don't know that the fever is necessarily secondary to coronavirus or just some other viral illness. Remember, when school starts back, we're going into flu season as well too, and you're going to have a lot of other viruses circulating at the same time. So you really don't know if the person who's febrile has coronavirus. We're just highly suspicious of it. I don't think it's necessary to quarantine the entire bus. I think it's okay to just take that one person off and have that person removed from the group into isolation area, have the parents come and pick them up. I think, those particular students that were in contact with the person who had the fever, they would have been wearing face masks, and hopefully there would have been some amount of distancing on the bus. So I think the risk of transmission would be a little less than it would have been if they had no face coverings or social distancing. I just think it's going to be hard to quarantine that entire bus. I don't know if Dr. Jackson is still on the call, if she can weigh in on this as well too. She's not. Well, that's just my opinion. I don't think it's necessary to quarantine the entire bus.
Okay, so based on what I'm hearing then, and maybe we'll bring this up, it is 10:15 or about to be 10:15. So what I'm hearing though is that we will, based on your concerns, we don't necessarily need to quarantine the entire bus based on a temperature check, particularly because everyone on the bus should be wearing face masks already. So if then we quarantine that one child, if they do have a higher temperature, is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And so,
Because
go
sorry,
ahead.
Tedra, because I mean, if you have a child who develops a fever during the day at school and they're in the classroom with other kids and have been in contact with other kids in the school, are you going to quarantine all of those kids in that classroom, all of the kids that have been in contact with that particular child who developed a fever during the course of the school day? I really don't know. I think that that's a bit much. I think that if we are practicing having the kids wear face masks and also social distance, the risk of transmission is going to be significantly decreased if we can definitely get the kids to wear the mask and social distance. That way we won't have to quarantine everybody when one person has a fever.
Okay, and then I have a question in the chat, Dr. Hines, from Mrs. Fortney.
Sure.
I'm thinking, her comment is, I'm thinking aloud, does the science back temperature as a symptom for young people?
So in kids, a lot of them tend to be asymptomatic, and they tend to present more with just cough and sometimes gastrointestinal symptoms like vomiting and diarrhea. There are some kids that will present with fever, and then that's definitely a blatant symptom of something viral or bacterial going on, whether or not it's coronavirus or some other viral illness or bacterial illness. So to answer your question, yes, because any child that's febrile really should not be in a classroom or in school on the day that they are febrile. So I think there is science to back temperature checks and science to also back excluding a child who's febrile from being part of the being in the classroom.
Okay, thank you. And then Audrey Kelly has her hand raised. Go ahead, Audrey.
No, I think I'll put my hand down. There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries, thank you. Okay, so just so we're clear, we're doing, so it is a consensus of the group to do temperature checks of all students before they arrive or before they are actually entering campus. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that a yes? Can I get a thumbs up or a yes or an agree to that? So again, the question is, are we recommending temperature checks for all students before, or let me phrase it differently. Are we recommending temperature checks for all students when they get off the bus, exit their car, or get off a bike, or before they walk into a school building? Is that what we're recommending? Shane Olson, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
You just said something that just set off a flag to me. We are going to need for sure a cool down area, because when we have kids riding in on their bike, they're going to have an elevated temperature from the exercise that they just put themselves through to get to school.
Okay, so I'm thinking about that. That's a bit ahead of me, but I've thought about that as well. So just hold that thought for 1 second, okay? and what we've not talked about employees at all. And so we need to think about employees as well. So we know that we have two things for kids right now. We know that we have face masks that will cover your nose and your mouth, and we also have the temperature checks for students. But for employees, we're recommending face masks, and we're also recommending, temperature checks for everybody as well. And so are we agreeing to that? Is that our recommendation from this group? Temperature checks for employees too. So I just need a yes for that as well in the chat if you can. And if you disagree, please just say no and then explain why. So again, the recommendation is temperature checks for employees and face masks for employees, and then temperature checks for students and face masks for students. Good. Okay, and so Doug Dodson. Doug, are you on any, oh, I'm sorry, any human that enters the building. So, okay, so any person, thank you, Chris, that would enter the building, human or not, we will ask that they are, they one, have a temperature check, and then two, have a face mask. And that includes parents as well, and that's a good point. So that would include parents, that would include contractors, any visitors. So we need to be very diligent about that. And for my school-based staff, I know that that may put a lot of extra work into what we do, but I think to Mr. Hill's point earlier, we may really have to revise our processes and really think about our processes from a school-based site. Mr. Cochran?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when you mentioned the contractors and parents, we are working on, as a subgroup of this group, how we're going to bring in business partners, community members, and community coaches back into the school if we're opening back up. And so that is one of the things that we have outlined so far, that anyone who comes onto campus would have a temperature check and would fill out a coronavirus questionnaire. You know, have they been exposed to anybody? Do they have any chills in the past 2 or 3 days? Anyway, I did want to let you know that we are covering that. And on another note, the subgroup that we've got asked to bring in some more individuals to get their opinions, some more community members because the group was lacking actually people who would come in to the school as representation. So we're going to extend that group out a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so that covers pretty much before students arrive on campus, and then kind of when students and staff arrive on campus. And then the third bullet that we need to take care of, and I'm going to share my screen with you. The third bullet that we need to talk about is when students and staff move about the campus. So mainly in hallways. And so some of our campuses are really open and airy and have lots of breezeways, and other campuses are closed, meaning they're all indoors. They don't have any breezeways. It's once you're in the building, you're in the building, and everything is pretty locked up. It's tight, you know, the weather doesn't get in, if that makes sense. And so we need to think about how students move and how staff would move in both buildings, essentially. Because the way that staff would move in the building that's open and airy may be different than the way the staff moves in a closed building. Or the alternative is we can just come up, obviously, or make one recommendation for all buildings, and then we kind of follow that district-wide. The only thing I would maybe caution us to think about is secondary and elementary may be very different in how they move about the buildings. And so we got to think about that operationally. So do we have any comments? Hold on. Dr. Hines, go ahead.
Hey, so I'm not, of course, not very familiar with the schools, but I was wondering if there was any way that we can have movement in one direction just to reduce close contact. I don't know. I'm not in schools. I'm just asking if there's any way to have that done where, you know, there's not kids coming in this direction and one going in that direction. We can have just one directional flow, and there's no way. Okay, then. So just a suggestion. I don't know. I just wanted to know if it was possible.
Okay, so I think that brings up a good point, though, and this is where the instructional people would really need to weigh in. What about bell schedules and bell times? And, you know, in terms of the point that Dr. Hines made, if the recommendation overall is to have people move in one direction, right? Everybody go east. I don't know, in a building. How would we ensure that a student on one side of the campus goes to the other side of the campus? Or even with scheduling. And so, Mr. Martinez, I don't know if you're still on the call, but this may be something for our administrators to think about when we're doing student schedules for this year. Normally, particularly with secondary, students are all over the place, depending largely upon their schedule. And so if I'm on the northeast side and I need to go to the southwest side, and you know, how do I as a student move through the building safely, quote unquote? Besides having my mask on, are there any other precautions that we need to take and or think about as students and staff, more importantly, move through the building? Hold on. So Steve Cochran, is your hand up? You're muted. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Okay, so fortunately, I've taught both at the elementary level and at the secondary level. When we're looking at the elementary level, it is basic. You can legitimately put a group of elementary kids into a room, and as much as it's going to suck for those kids, you can keep them in that room all day, because when it comes time for their specials, the specials teacher could come to their location and conduct their specials. The teacher could leave the room and go and do the thing that they need to do. If we negotiate it with PEA that we do lunch in the classroom, then the cafeteria workers could come and deliver their food. So we could make it very, very easy to do at the elementary level. But like you said, at the secondary level, I have taught at multiple schools. And like you said, I've taught at some schools such as Denison, where it is completely enclosed. And I've taught at other schools where it is completely, you have that availability to have the openness, such as Auburndale High School. So when you're looking at a school like Denison, or the school that I'm currently at Stambaugh, and this goes to Dr. Hines' question, why I started laughing, shaking my head, is that when you have a release of students, those hallways become absolutely jam-packed, and people are trying to fight to get to their next location in the amount of time that we provide them, which at Stambaugh is 3 minutes. And so to get all the way across campus in 3 minutes is a struggle. So it becomes a literal cluster of human bodies that are pushing each other. And that's why when I sent out that letter to everyone, I said in the letter, how are we going to possibly begin to social distance with passing periods? Because it is just, any teacher, any administrator who has been in a hallway knows what I am talking about. There is absolutely no physical way those children are going to be social distancing. And this is one of the realities that I'm going, to.
Thank you, Chris. That's a good point, and it brings up another point. I'm going to let Mr. Cochran, I think his hand is legitimately raised now. So go ahead, Mr. Cochran.
Thank you. When I learn how to work this, it'll be a lot better. You know, one of the things I think that we need to express to our principals is to give them some flexibility. As I put in the chat room before, we may lose some instructional time for safety reasons. That's still going to be better than kids at home on computers without any guidance or supervision. So, you know, some of the things if we allow principals to do, to maybe stagger bells, or maybe students who are changing to go to a math class will leave, then another 3 minutes, you stagger it for students leaving for an English class. We need to allow them some creativity so that they can lessen what's going on in the hallways. But you know, that's going to come from us. How much flexibility that we give the principals to do, you know, in order to make their school safer. That's all I have.
So thank you. And Mr. Martinez, I think you have a comment. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I think one of the biggest concerns would be, and I agree with a lot of you, what you've said, is in terms of especially when you release kids in the hallways. We have 6 minutes between class, but there's a lot of congregation. A lot of students are gathered, and for social reasons, but they're getting to class on time for the most part. I think we may need to look at block scheduling for the middle and high schools and we're straight seven. So that would be a concern for us, because we'd have to do our, not really the master schedule, so to speak, because if we do 7 periods, I think we'd probably even try to limit to 6 periods. And then that would be less movement throughout the day. So I just think there's some variations that need to occur, but I think we all need to be the same. I know there's some schools that are 7 periods, some that are block schedule, but I think we all need to kind of stay the same, because the mobility rate for most of the high schools right now, we have 10 kids withdraw and enroll the same week. And that's a weekly basis. So it's not like, some of the magnet schools that when they start school, they don't have any new kids coming in and very little leaving. And so, but our mobility rate is about 10 students that we enroll a week and 10 that we withdraw a week. And it could be, within our district, it could be out of county, it could be out of state. It just depends. But I think, maybe something that we look at is going to a block schedule to limit the time. And typically when you do a block schedule, you do Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then Friday's a pure 7, or you do Monday a pure 7 or Wednesday a pure 7. I would recommend that we don't do the pure 7s. We go block schedule, and we just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then Tuesday, Thursday, and then the following week we switch them. So we go an A-B schedule or something or other. I think we just need to be creative within our own school to do this. But I also think that, it will limit the number of movement within the school. But I will tell you, in a high school and specifically, and I can't speak for all of them. I've worked at Bartow High School. I've worked at Lake Gibson High School, and obviously Lakeland High School and Fort Meade Middle Senior. The mobility in a high school, there's a lot of kids that are out and about during class or in class change. So I think it's something that we really need to look at and try to limit. I am all for going back to school, and I can't wait to get started again, but I just think it's something that we really need to address.
Thank you, Art. I think that's a really, really great point. I had not thought about block scheduling, but I think that could be a recommendation, again, from this group to the overall group, that everybody, meaning secondary, so secondary for those non-instructional people means grades 6 through 12, middle and high school, would go block scheduling. And then that way that would reduce the amount of student movement. And I think Mrs. Fortney said A and B days. So maybe on an A day, you go to periods 1 through 4, and then on B days, maybe you go to periods 4 through 8 or whatever that is. But I really like that recommendation. And I have another idea, but I see Mr. Davis's hand is raised. Go ahead.
I was just checking to see, is the idea of having half the student population come on like a Monday and Wednesday, and the other half Tuesday and Thursday, with a Friday as a teacher planning day? Is that off the table completely?
I don't know that it's off the table. I've really not heard a lot about it, to be honest with you. I think that that would be something, that would be another recommendation that we can make. Because quite honestly, if we do block scheduling, and I'm going to take a poll in a second, but if we do block scheduling, it would be easier in terms of having the AB days and the BC days, and then we clean on Fridays and disinfect or do a deep cleaning on Friday. I think that would, one, put everybody's mind at ease in terms of the people in the buildings. 2, we know that they are being deep cleaned every week, and then we can go from there. So I personally like the idea, but let's talk to the group about it and then go from there. One of the other things, as Mr. Martinez was talking, Art was talking about the block scheduling, what I thought about is, and we don't have any, Michelle is not on here, but Mr. Hill, I don't know if we've even thought about extending the time period between classes. So let's say we do block scheduling, And instead of it, I don't know, let's just take Lakeland High School, for example. If there are 5 minutes between each class, maybe let's extend that to 10 minutes and then have students released by groups. So maybe all the ninth graders move to a class first, I don't know, and then in the first 2 minutes, and then all the 10th graders move to a class in the second 2 minutes, and then, have it staggered so everybody's not in the hallway at the same time. Logistically, I don't know if that's going to work.
Well, that's a good idea. And actually, I believe there are a few schools that do some variation of that, where they do stagger dismissals to maybe the middle level. I'm not sure about the high school, but I do agree with Art that if you use a block scheduling or an alternating day block schedule type of configuration, that it will definitely reduce the traffic and the movement in the school. In regards to what Rob was talking about, that was what originally was called a hybrid model. There was a lot of concern from the community, especially our most fragile folks, trying to, if my children are going 2 days a week and then they're home 2 days a week. And so I think we looked at that initially, but I think we've focused on more of a virtual, and then also an e-learning connected to the schools. I know we're looking at that heavily. I think we need to really consider what Art said and maybe looking at that scheduling model, and each school knows their school well enough to know how to adapt that, and let it be kind of here's what we'd like for you to do, and then leave it to the schools to either how they go about scheduling that, but some consistency with it, obviously.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Hill. So I have a few other hands raised, and I just want everybody to know it's 10:30. So after this, I'm just going to take one last polling, if you will, or a question from you all. I'll pose one last question to you all and get you to agree or disagree, and then we can go from there. So April Sumner, her hand is raised. April?
Good morning. Just to answer Chris's question that he put in the chat, you could still do 7 periods on a block schedule. You have AB, and then a 7th period would be every day consistent. So that's still doable. But my question to Art is, we're a month out now. Is there enough time for admin to get the schedules changed over to a block schedule? I know that wouldn't necessarily change their kids, the master schedule, but do you have enough time, basically? Or are we going to put too much pressure on the schools to get ready for that come August the 10th?
Mr. Martinez, you want to answer?
Sure. Yeah, I believe it's possible to do that. It's just really making a switch. And it's something that we'll have to look at now and look into focus. But I'll have to get with our APC and then obviously with DJ Dines and whoever at the district office to make that switch. But we've created ours. We're in the middle of creating ours right now for a 7-period day. But it might be as simple as just hitting a switch that creates a block schedule. So the class is already there. It's just a matter of how we decide to move forward with it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Perrone, your hand is raised. Did you mean to have you?
Yeah, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that's a huge cost, and we'd have to think about it. And not only that, in hiring, there's a number of positions that would have to be added. So just keep that in mind if you go from current scheduling to block.
So it will be a financial increase?
Huge.
For the alternating day 7-period block?
Say that one more time. It's too many people talking. Try again.
I said that's why we don't do block scheduling right now in all buildings.
No.
Okay. And what was your question, Mr. Hill?
I was just wondering if he's talking about the 4x4 block, or is he talking about the alternating day, the 7 alternating day?
4x4.
So
I think, Mr. Hill, there's a cost to each. One is less, so we can talk about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not saying no. I just need you to know that
Yeah.
There is a financial implication to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perone. Okay, so I have Mr. Chris. Chris, you have any? I see your hand is raised. Is that intentional? No? Okay, so I'll lower your hand. April Sumner, is your hand raised intentionally, or have you already?
I believe that was, it's still up from the last time. I don't know how to unraise it.
No, no worries. I'll lower it. And Mr. Martinez, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, I was curious about the, I mean, I understand there is an additional cost for a 4x4, but I mean, you have several high schools, Bartow High School and George Jenkins High School, that already do the block schedule right now. So I'm just not sure, I'm not certain how the cost would increase. I mean, it's just an alternating schedule is what you're doing. It doesn't,
Yeah,
it
same
shouldn't
amount of
cost us
units.
anything else. So I'm just not quite sure how that would work.
We'll have to look at it because I'm just saying a straight block. When I heard you first talking, it was straight
yeah.
block scheduling.
No. Yeah, now Lakeland High School used to be on a straight block 4x4, but that was years ago, and we're just straight 7 now. But I don't think an alternating block schedule with 7 periods would change anything monetarily speaking.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so there are the recommendation that's on the table currently is absent the cost implications, do we want to recommend to the group that secondary, meaning 6 through 12, goes to a block schedule to reduce the amount of student time and student movement? Is that something that we're really ready to recommend right now? Or do we want to maybe think about it, get some numbers from Mr. Perone, or get some examples from Mr. Perone in terms of the costs? Or what are we thinking? And I think Larry had his hand up. Larry, do you want to comment while everybody's thinking about it?
No, I was just going to say, get some numbers from Mike to see what it looks like. But if there's not a big switch in the cost in it, I would say we need to go to the alternating block schedule.
Okay, so the recommendation that we currently have is a block schedule. Hopefully the numbers won't be too bad in terms of the implications of it. Steve, do you have your hand up?
I do, and I agree with exactly what Larry said, is that I think it's the way to go, but we do need to look and see to make sure there aren't any cost implications. One thing I did want to bring up, and if it was a cost of additional staff, we are going to have some, we're going to displace some staff anyway because of the flood to virtual, either Polk virtual or Florida virtual. So that it may come out in the wash anyway. But anyway, we do need to look at it before we make that recommendation. But I do think it's the way to go.
Okay, so what I'll commit to is I'll get with Mr. Perone and maybe work out just some numbers, and I'll do a comparison with, let's say, a 7-period day. That's what Mr. Martinez is on. And then if we were a straight block or a AB block, and then we'll look at the numbers in terms of the additional staff needed and what the additional costs are, okay? So I think right now we've covered a lot. I really want to thank you for your time and for your level of detail and attentiveness to this. Number one, I know that our students really appreciate it, and the parents of our students really appreciate it, but more importantly, our staff really does appreciate your dedication to this group. It is really imperative that we are free to talk and have these ideas and agree to disagree. You know, I think that that's a part of the process in working through these issues. So all in all, it is 10:39. So I know that we started at 9:15. So we're about an hour and 51 minutes at this point. Does anyone have anything else that we need to absolutely address? And so for our next meeting, I need you all to think about this. For our next meeting, we're going to talk about how staff and students utilize classroom space, and then extracurriculars. So sports, Mr. Martinez brought that up, particularly at the secondary level, is very important. So what does that look like in our heads? Are we requiring masks for them, or what are we doing for them? I don't know that you can wear a mask and play football, but that's just me. That's the first thing that I think about. And then we also need to think about exiting procedures. So we've talked about students and staff entering the building. We've talked about having them get the temperature checks and what we're going to recommend there. However, we need to start thinking about how they're exiting the building as well. So those are the three things that I would like for us to go ahead and be able to do for next week's call. Also, as a heads up, Dr. Hines was really gracious enough to connect me with a pediatric epidemiologist. And so hopefully we can schedule some time to hear their presentation. The pediatric epidemiologist is from Nemours Pediatric Center, and that's based in Orlando. They are really, really large if you're unfamiliar with them. And
Infectious.
So, I'm sorry?
Infectious disease specialist.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Infectious disease specialist. Thank you so much. But she was really gracious enough to connect us with that. And that will allow us to make some really informed decisions based on what true science says and what they believe some of their recommendations are. And so that would drive our conversation, I believe, for not only our students, but also our staff and how we're addressing all of this. So again, thank you so much, y'all, for your time. I really appreciate it. I still see a few hands raised. So I just want to make sure that I address those and then we can go, then we can dismiss this meeting. So Shane or Chris, I'm sorry, you got to change your name.
Chris, it is. Okay, mine are two really quick. One, we really never addressed the question you had of how to get kids passing periods, even on a block schedule. It reduces the amount of exposure, but we never really addressed how we're going to get our children from point A to point B safely. So we need to add that to the next meeting.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Second thing that I have just really quick, instructional committee is meeting twice a week. Is there any way with all that we have to try to get through before the 10th that we increase the amount of meetings that this group is going to be having?
Well, I actually don't mind that. So it's really up to the group. Do you all want to meet again? Maybe on the 6th, if that's possible, Monday the 6th, because today's Wednesday. You want to meet on Monday the 6th? Is that possible? So what I'll do is I'll send an invite for this group only to meet again on the 6th, on Monday the 6th. And so we can go over those things, including moving the camp or moving about campus. And then we'll have the final numbers, or I'll get some numbers from Mr. Perrone on the cost associated with that. And then we can go from there. Mr. Martinez, is your hand still raised?
No, ma'am, I'm good.
Okay, I'll lower your hand. Mr. Cochran?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, what time were you thinking about that meeting on Monday? Because I was going to have a subcommittee meeting too. And that won't be a problem. I'll just work around your meeting. But was there a time you were thinking Monday?
So if you all can do me a favor, utilize the chat and just put a time in that will be convenient for you. And what I'll do is I'll look at those and kind of tally them and then send out the meeting invite based on the times that you all enter. I would prefer the morning if at all possible. I think this time is good, probably from 9:15 to about, let's plan for 10:30 or maybe 9:15 to 11 at the latest. I think that will allow us to cover a great deal of material and then make very significant or make some recommendations for the group, for the larger group. So go ahead and put those times that you are available. If 9:15 works for you, just type 9:15. And that is again for Monday the 6th. And then Mr. Hill, I think your hand was up as well.
Yes, thank you. I recommend that we send an invite to Dan Talbot if we're going to talk about athletics. Let's send him an invite to jump in with us.
He's actually on this group. He had another conflict meeting today, and so he called me
today. I thought he was. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
He called me yesterday and said he
okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so thank you everyone again. So we will hopefully see each other Monday the 6th at 9:15-ish. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you all a great and safe holiday weekend. It's a lot going on, but if you can get a chance to enjoy your families and just relax, let's take a break. Let's have a deep breath, and then we'll be back at it again Monday at 9:15-ish. Okay, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you.